Let's bring in Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, they're not taking up any of your time because it's not gotten to the Senate yet. How much longer does your chamber sit on the sideline before you think Chuck Schumer says, I'm going to put something out there?
Well, good morning, Brian. It's good to be back on with you. I hope that we don't sit on the sidelines much longer, Brian, because a secondary effect of the delay in funding the government is that Chuck Schumer has more time to put more radical judges on the bench, and regrettably, that's what we'll be doing today. We had hoped to pass the government funding bill yesterday and adjourn for the Congress, 5-0 on Chuck Schumer's 4 disastrous years as majority leader, but instead, we're going to be voting on 2 left-wing judges today. So I hope it doesn't go much beyond that, and I certainly hope it doesn't go beyond midnight tonight because I don't think a shutdown is good for the American people or anyone's interests.
Here's James Comer, cut 4.
So if we're going to pass something, there's going to have to obviously have Democrat support. So we'll see what happens. But nothing can happen in this Congress without Democrat support.
Why don't people realize that? I mean, I know what you stand for. I know you're very conservative. I know that AOC is very liberal. But we know in Congress, by your job description, sometimes you got to compromise only so much you can do. How did we get to this spot where people still are ranting about spending or not spending, about a program or not a program, when we only have a few hours left?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, for more than a year now, on any consequential piece of legislation, it has taken Democratic votes. And part of the reason for that is the Republican House members are still deeply divided, and it's probably not going to get much better in the new Congress. They lose a seat or 2. One thing I'd stress when it comes to the House, which is different from the Senate, as you know, Brian, it's a majoritarian institution. When you have the majority, your power is only as strong as your ability to hang together in the majority. If you can put 218 votes on the board, then you can accomplish a lot. If not, then you're going to accomplish much less, because every time the Speaker of the House, whoever that Speaker is, whether it's Mike Johnson or Kevin McCarthy or those 4 has to go to the Democrats start demanding ransom. And then you have a downward spiral where you're getting more and more Democratic wishes and losing more and more Republican votes. So it's really important, not just now, Brian, not just now for a short-term funding bill, but as we look ahead to the new Congress, if we want to secure our border, rebuild our military, reduce gas and electricity prices for our people, and cut taxes for everyone, we're going to have to hang together. We're going to have to produce majority votes in the House and the Senate if we want to advance President Trump's agenda.
So Elon Musk just said when they said D.C. swamp creatures, I thought that was just a metaphor, and he's a little disenchanted. Do you think, as bright as Elon Musk is, that he actually can understand the mechanisms of what's possible in the House as Speaker Johnson's deal got blown up, or are you kind of glad it did get blown up?
No, I think obviously Elon Musk is extremely bright, and even though he's relatively new to politics, he certainly played a critical role in helping elect President Trump, electing Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania to give us an extra seat in the Senate, and Dave's going to be a great senator. And I think what happened on Wednesday is just that, the American people, especially Republican voters, were surprised and disappointed in some cases about what the proposed bill included, and Elon Musk simply helped highlight some of that on cuts. Again, though, Brian, it's the same dynamic I just studied. When a speaker, any speaker, has to go to the minority party to get votes, the minority party makes demands for turn, and then that loses more of the majority votes, and then you get more demands from the minority party, and you end up with bills that have more Democratic votes than Republican votes. That's not a dynamic that we want to play out, and frankly, that's not a dynamic that we can afford to play out when it comes to passing major budget bills next year. Not short-term spending bills, but major bills that are going to deliver the president's agenda. That is almost certainly going to be Republican majorities that carry those bills. So we really have to work together as a team with President Trump if we want to accomplish everything.
So, Senator, talking to Senator Tom Cotton, you recognize his voice. Senator, the Wall Street Journal story did not surprise me, did not surprise you. We got detail about how the president really has not been president for 4 years. And I was just thinking about, of all the ramifications, think about Afghanistan. They say he made the decision by himself. No one could get to him like Adam Smith, a Democrat, to warn him about what could go wrong. He didn't listen to General Milley, didn't listen to McKenzie. They didn't put their stars on the ground. So many people left behind. So many people died. So many people are still dying. Taliban in control. And then you have Vladimir Putin meeting with Joe Biden. Don't you think Putin realized that Biden's a shell of a human being? And this was their opportunity to strike, and they did in Ukraine. Do you think about, have you thought about the ripple effects of a invisible president?
Yeah, Brian, it's not surprising at all. The Wall Street Journal story just confirms what we all can see with our own eyes, going back as far as the campaign, much less his early days in office. And you still see those ripple effects playing out right now, Brian. Let's remember that although Donald Trump is dominating the political scene, Joe Biden is still the president. Joe Biden may be forgotten, but he's not gone. Where has he been for the last week trying to negotiate a spending bill to keep his own administration funded for his final month in office? And as you highlight, there's one most critical moment, and that was in the run-up to the debacle in Afghanistan that led to the death of 13 brave Americans and the humiliation of America that tempted Vladimir Putin to go for the jugular in Ukraine and had other cascading effects. And members of Congress couldn't get a hold of Joe Biden. They couldn't express a different perspective. He couldn't remember that his senior military leaders, to include, I've been told, Brian, all of his key cabinet officials as well, told him that this was ill-advised, that it was going to end poorly, that things were rapidly deteriorating. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, Brian, of what we're going to see now that there's no consequences. Remember, anyone who tried to ring this alarm bell was shouted down by Democrats and their liberal media allies during the 4 years of the Biden presidency, and even after he stayed in July, because it was in their interest to maintain their vow of silence, a level of omerta that I'm not sure even the mafia could uphold. But now that they're leaving office and they're worried about their own reputations and they're worried about their own livelihoods in the future, I think you're going to see a lot more of these stories, basically of people like Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken and Janet Yellen saying, yeah, we tried to explain it to the boss, but, he was just too gone.
Chris Kiza of CNN, formerly of CNN, now doing his own thing. He's apologizing. Cut 19.
People around Biden worked to make you feel bad when you asked whether he was up to the job of being president, running for president again, and serving as president for another 4 years. How could you? And they did a very good job, at least until they couldn't hide it anymore, of hiding it.
So he said, I should have pressed harder. Please. New York Times, Washington Post, every network, until he fell apart in June, they knew this, and they were still going to put him up to run for another 4 years. Senator Cotton, this is unbelievable. Anybody who is complicit in this should be eliminated from consideration from any office. Obama knew about it. Schumer knew about it. Kamala Harris knew about it, was lying up until yesterday about it. And they really want credibility from here on in. They cared more about themselves and their party than the country.
Yeah, it is true what was just said in that clip, that the people around Biden, the Biden high command in the White House, kept him under lock and key and would browbeat anyone, Democratic legislators, reporters, pundits, for questioning his fitness for office. That didn't mean that those people had to just accept the browbeating. They could have said what their own eyes told them.
Yeah.
Take Chuck Schumer, for instance. Biden is forgotten but not gone. Soon he'll be gone and forgotten. But Chuck Schumer is still going to be the Democratic leader in the Senate. In February, not even 4 months from his debate against Joe Biden in June, Chuck Schumer was saying Joe Biden's mental acuity is great. His mental acuity hasn't declined. Joe Biden had not lost a step in the 40 years that Chuck Schumer known him, not lost a step, and that it was Republican propaganda to think otherwise. And then you saw what happened in the debate, and now we hear these stories starting to leak out. How can you trust anything Chuck Schumer says? But for that matter, how could anyone other than a fool or a small child have ever trusted anything Chuck Schumer says?
So lastly, I want to go to the Pentagon. How is it that we were told there was 900 troops in Syria, and it turns out there were 2,000? This is part of the chaos. I don't think Joe Biden even knows if we had troops there. Our Secretary of Defense was a 4-star general, used to be deployed in that region. How is that possible, Senator?
It shouldn't be possible. I can tell you, Brian, from experience, that every commander knows down to a man where his people are on every single day. He takes the roll up. I personally saw it in Afghanistan. It's not at the battalion level. There is a daily battle update that tells you to a operating boat based in combat outpost and leave and pass and sick call where every one of your people are. And just have the Pentagon saying publicly that we had 9 troops there when in reality we had 2,000 troops there is something that they need to explain, because they knew how many troops they had there. They knew it was being publicly reported. They didn't correct the record.
Senator, there's a story in the Wall Street Journal that that President Trump, Trump, and Benjamin Netanyahu are talking about hitting Iran pretty quickly because they are on a breakneck pace to get a nuclear weapon, and they've never been more vulnerable. How do you feel about that report, if true?
Well, Iran is, for the first time in decades, exposed on its flanks, Brian. In particular, Hezbollah has been devastated, and Hezbollah was always the strategic deterrent that Iran had against Israel. If Israel threatened Iran directly, Hezbollah had more than 100,000 rockets and missiles and mortars and other weapons aimed at Israel. But thanks to the remarkable leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the incredible skill and bravery of the Israeli Defense Forces, Hezbollah has been largely neutered. It's certainly leaderless. And Iran, in what I think is now seen as a very foolhardy decision, decided to strike directly at Israel. Israel struck back, destroyed virtually all of Iran's air and missile defenses. So Iran's jugular is completely exposed in the way it hasn't been really in over 30 years. And I don't think Israel can live the nuclear Iran or even a nuclear threshold Iran, Brian. And as I've said from the beginning of Israel's latest war of survival, our policy is very simple. We should back Israel to the hilt.
Absolutely. You don't want to be the president who allows Iran, the most evil empire out there with Russia, China, and North Korea, to get a nuclear weapon. So, especially in a region that could, believe it or not, is closer to peace today than any time over the last few 20, 30 years, because Hezbollah, Hamas are not what they were, and Syria is no longer Syria no longer a pathway for Hezbollah to get rearmed. So Israel's in a pretty good spot right now. Senator, we have so much to discuss, but sadly I'm up against a break. I look forward to your role now. You're among leadership of the GOP conference chair, Armed Services, Judiciary, and Intelligence Committee, while still raising your family. That's why you're not one of the nominees in his President Trump's cabinet. Senator, thanks so much. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you, Brian. Merry Christmas to you, the Kilmeade family, and all of your wonderful listeners.
And we got a lot of them. Thanks so much, Senator. Back in a moment.